The wind comes first, and it comes from everywhere at once. Not a violent wind, not this evening, not the kind that drives horizontal sleet across the black sand flats and makes it impossible to stand upright without leaning hard into it. This wind is steadier than that, and lower, a constant pressure that moves across the open land from the northwest with the patience of something that has been blowing for a very long time and expects to be blowing for a very long time still. You feel it against the side of your face, against the back of your hands, along the exposed skin at your collar. It is cold, and it is damp, and it carries in it the smell of the sea, not the warm salt and seaweed smell of a sheltered harbour, but the rawer, deeper smell of open ocean, of water that has travelled a very great distance over nothing but more water before arriving at this shore. You are standing on the edge of a farmstead in medieval Iceland, in late autumn, and the light is fading. The sky above you is not dark, not yet. It holds a residual grey brightness in the west that is the last memory of the day's brief sun brief, even now, in the early weeks of the dark season, when the days are shortening rapidly and the darkness is beginning its long claim on the hours. The grey brightness is fading as you watch, the western sky moving from pale grey to a deeper grey blue, the texture of the clouds above it showing more clearly as the last light goes, layered and moving. The clouds running from the northwest in long unravelling shapes that catch the fading brightness at their edges and then release it. To the east, where the sky is already dark, the first stars are not yet visible. The clouds are too thick and too complete. Tonight, there will be no stars, but there will be something else. Far to the north, beyond the dark bulk of the ridge that defines the northern edge of the valley, there is a faint, irregular glow above the ridge line. Not fire, not any earthly fire. It shifts and wavers at its upper edge in a way that fire does not shift. A slow and sourceless shimmer, pale green-white, like the glow of something cold rather than something burning. You watch it for a moment, this distant light above the ridge, and then the clouds close over it and it is gone, and there is only the grey sky and the darkening valley and the wind. The valley itself is wide and flat at its floor, the land pale with frost-browned grass that has lain down under the wind and the cold of the advancing season and not risen again. The grass is not dead, it will come back in the spring, as it always comes back, as reliable as anything in this landscape, but it is finished for the year, lying in long, wind-pressed waves that run along the ground like water. Between the grass, the dark lines of drainage channels cross the valley floor in irregular patterns, some of them with thin ice at their edges. The ice not thick yet, still translucent, showing the dark water beneath it. The ground is not frozen hard, not yet, but it is cold enough that each step leaves a faint impression in the frost-softened surface. The farmstead is a cluster of low buildings set against the valley's eastern slope, where the rise of the ground provides some shelter from the northwest wind. There are several buildings of different sizes, their roof lines very low. Their walls built of turf, the same turf method used across this island for the building of almost everything, because the island has no significant forests, and the stone available is mostly volcanic and difficult to work, but the turf is everywhere, abundant and excellent for the purpose. The walls are thick, the width of a long stride, in some places wider, and faced on their outer surfaces with a rough, frost-gripped grass that makes each building look as if it has grown from the ground rather than been placed upon it. The roofs are also turf, laid over a structure of driftwood, and whatever timber has been brought at great expense from the forests of Norway. And over the roof turf the same frost-browned grass lies in the same long wind-pressed waves as the grass of the valley floor, so that from any distance the buildings are almost indistinguishable from the land around them. Only their shape and their smoke holes and the darkness of their doorways marking them as the work of people rather than the work of the ground itself. From the largest of the buildings, the main hall, The skáli, the heart of the farmstead's smoke, rises from a hole at the roof's ridge. The smoke pale grey and immediate, bending immediately in the wind and streaming away to the southeast, torn apart within a short distance and dispersed. The smoke is the most obvious sign of life from outside. It means the fire is burning inside, which means the hall is warm, which means the people are there. Everything in a farmstead in Iceland in late autumn concentrates toward that fact. The people are inside, the fire is burning, and the evening has begun. You walk toward the farm along a path of flat stones that someone has laid through the worst of the wet ground between the track and the hall door. The stones are uneven, and in places they have settled unevenly into the soft ground, and you pick your steps carefully on them. On either side of the path, the ground is churned by the regular passage of feet and of animals the cattle have been brought in already, weeks ago, when the grass stopped growing, and now they live in the attached byre through the winter, and the churned ground at the path's edges holds the frost in its hollows and pools water in its deeper impressions. The smell of the farmstead is layered. The outside smells of wind and frost grass and cold soil, and over that, closer to the buildings, the smells of the farm itself, the animal warmth of the byre, the wood smoke from the hall's roof, the faint and complicated smell of all the things that a working farmstead accumulates over a season. You reach the hall door. It is a low door, lower than you would expect. You must duck slightly to enter, which is partly a matter of the building's general low profile and partly a deliberate design, since a low door loses less warmth every time it is opened, and in this climate the warmth inside a hall is not a luxury but a careful achievement, maintained against the constant cold with fuel that has been cut and carried and dried and managed through the summer months precisely so that the winter can be survived in some reasonable comfort. The door itself is heavy timber, driftwood most likely, or traded Norwegian wood, its surface weathered and hard and fitted into its frame with iron hinges that have grown a faint rust red at their edges. A twisted rope of dried grass hangs beside the door, not decorative, but a practical thing, used to wipe your feet before entering, to keep the tracked mud of the farmyard from coming into the hall in the quantities that would otherwise accumulate. You pause at the door and lift the latch, a simple peg of carved wood that fits into a catch on the inside, and you push the door inward, and you bend your head, and you enter. But first you stand at the threshold for another moment, looking back at the valley. The darkness has fully settled while you are walking up the path. The western sky holds no brightness now. The last grey light has gone, taken with it whatever distinction there was between the clouds and the sky behind them, leaving only a uniform dark above and the pale frost-flattened valley below. The farmstead buildings around you are barely distinguishable from the slope against which they are built. The other buildings are dark shapes, the storehouse set on its short stone piers to keep the damp and the rodents from reaching the provisions stored within it. The smaller tool shed, its door not quite fully closed, the darkness inside it visible at the gap. The smithy set slightly apart from the rest, cold and lightless, its forge unused until the next time it is needed. The charcoal and the bellows and the iron stock and the tongs all waiting in the dark with the patience of things that require a human being to become useful and are content to wait for that. The wind moves along the valley floor in long, uneven pulses. Between the pulses, in the brief relative calms, the silence of the valley is very large. It is the silence of a flat and open landscape under a closed sky, with no trees to move in the wind, and no water close enough to hear, and no other farmstead within a distance that would carry sound across the cold air. In the still moments, you hear only the wind's absence and the faint creak of the roof timbers of the hall behind you, adjusting themselves in the cold. The smoke from the hall's roof hole comes toward you on the wind, and then is pulled away, and then returns a warm, peat, heavy smell that is entirely specific to this fuel and this place. the smell of the household from outside, the smell of warmth as it is experienced from the cold. It tells you more directly than the visible seams of firelight at the door's edges what is inside that door. You take one more breath of the cold outside air. The frost grass smell, the sea smell, the smoke smell, the smell of the particular darkness of late autumn in Iceland. Then you turn back to the door and go in. The warmth moves against your face at the threshold, and the smell of the hall arrives all at once. It is a rich and layered smell, not entirely clean, not entirely pleasant by any simple judgment, but entirely specific to this place. And once you have been inside for a few minutes, it recedes from notice and becomes simply the smell of the interior of the world. The background against which everything else occurs. Wood smoke first, always wood smoke. The dominant note beneath which everything else is arranged. The warm, resinous smoke of driftwood and dried peat burning in the long hearth. The smoke that has been rising into this space every day and night of every winter for as long as the building has stood, and that has blackened the roof timbers and the underside of the turf to a deep, even darkness. Beneath the smoke, the animal smell coming through the partition from the byre, the cattle and their straw, warm and fermentive and dense, pressing through the internal wall with the warmth they generate and the smell they carry. Beneath that, the smell of people in a small space, wool clothing worn long, bodies kept warm by effort and by proximity. The particular human smell of a household concentrated into a single room through the months of winter. And beneath all of that, fainter but present, the smell of food, cooked grain, dried fish, something in fat, the evening meal already made and eaten, its smell still moving through the warm air of the hall. You straighten up inside the door and look along the length of the sky. It is long, as all such halls are long, extending before you in a single space whose far end is in semi-darkness. The walls are the inside faces of the turf construction, smoothed in places with a wash of clay, hung in other places with rough woven panels of undyed wool that serve both to improve the appearance of the interior and to reduce the cold that seeps through even the thickest turf wall. The floor is beaten earth, packed hard by long use, with flat stones at the threshold and around the hearth where the traffic is heaviest and where the earth would otherwise become muddy. At the sides, slightly raised above the floor level, the sleeping platforms run the length of both walls broad. Low benches of timber covered with furs and folded blankets and straw where the furs have run thin. The sleeping places of the household are ranged along both walls in a row, each one slightly differentiated from the next by the belongings arranged at its head or foot. The hearth runs down the center of the hall, a long, shallow depression in the floor, with flat hearthstones at its margins, in which a fire burns at a settled, managed level. The fuel is a combination of dried peat and driftwood, and the peat especially gives the fire a particular quality. It burns slowly, with a low flame that does not roar or flicker dramatically, but produces a steady, dense heat, and its smoke is slightly different from wood smoke, earthier and heavier, with a quality that is entirely specific to this fuel and this place, and that would tell you, blindfolded, that you are somewhere in the North Atlantic world where peat fires are burned. The fire is long enough to give warmth to several people on either side, and to be the center around which the evening arranges itself. The people gather along the edges of the platforms on either side of it. The lamplight supplements the firelight, and the hall is warm enough that the outer garments have been removed and set aside. Above the hearth, the smoke rises toward the louvre in the roof, an opening fitted with a simple baffle of wood and turf that can be adjusted by a pole from below, opened to allow more smoke to escape when the fire is fed, partially closed when the wind is such that the drawer reverses and the smoke pushes back into the hall. Some smoke always remains. You can see it in the lamplight, a slow horizontal haze at about the height of a standing person, above which the smoke thickens toward the roof, and below which the air is clearer and breathable. The roof timbers and the turf above them are uniformly dark, with the deposit of many winters. The wood there the colour of old iron, the surface of it rough and invisible in the dim light above. The people of the farmstead are gathered around the fire in the arrangement of an ordinary evening. The farmer himself, the Bindi, the head of this household and this land, sits at the inner end of the hall, on a raised section of the sleeping platform that is, by the customs of household arrangement, his place. He is perhaps 50 years old, heavy in the shoulders, with a broad, weathered face and dark hair, going grey at the temples, cut roughly and worn to the collar. He wears a tunic of thick, undyed wool, and over it a sleeveless outer garment of heavier material, belted with a leather strap, whose iron buckle has been repaired at some point with a new pin. His boots are of sealskin, practical and worn. He sits with one knee drawn up and his elbow resting on it, and he is not speaking at this moment. He is watching the fire with the particular inwardness of a man who has been working outdoors since before first light and is now, for the first time in many hours, simply still. To his left, his wife sits on the edge of the platform, with her legs hanging down toward the hearthstones. She is perhaps 40 years old, thin-faced, with her dark hair in a long braid pinned at the back of her head, with a pair of simple bone pins. Her hands are occupied, they are always occupied, in this place and this season, with a tablet weaving, a small loom of cards through which coloured threads are passed and turned in sequence to produce a narrow band of patterned fabric, the kind used for trimming the hems and collars of better garments. The pattern is a simple geometric one, red thread against an undyed background, and she works it from memory, her fingers moving through the turn sequence without her needing to count or look. A young woman of perhaps 18 or 19 years sits further along the same platform, closer to the fire. She is carding wool, drawing the fibre between two paddles set with fine wire teeth, pulling the fibres into alignment, producing a smooth, even roving that can be spun into thread. She works with the slightly mechanical patience of someone doing necessary work that does not require much of her attention, and her eyes are on the fire rather than on her hands. Her expression not inward exactly, but elsewhere, in the middle distance of an evening thought. Two children, a boy of about 10 and a girl perhaps 2 years younger, sit together at the hearthside nearest the door end of the hall. They have been given a task. They are separating dried herbs from their stems, pulling the small dried leaves and flowers from the woody stalks, and collecting them in a clay bowl. The boy does his portion with a determined, somewhat aggressive thoroughness. The girl does hers more carefully, examining each stem before she strips it, occasionally setting aside a particularly interesting fragment to look at more closely before it too goes into the bowl. Further along the hall, in the shadows toward the back, two servants, a man and a woman, both young, both wearing plain, worn wool, are finishing work of their own. The man is mending a piece of leather harness, his awl and thread in use, the harness draped across his knees. The woman is stacking the wooden trenchers from the evening meal against the wall in an orderly pile, a task that has the quality of the last task, the one done when everything else is done, and the evening can properly begin. The hall smells of all of them, and of the fire, and of the building itself, and it is warm, and the lamplight from two shallow clay lamps burning fish oil from wicks of dried moss or plant fibre adds its own warm, slightly fishy smell to the rest of it. Everything here is managed, everything is attended to, everything is the result of continuous effort directed against the cold and the dark and the long winter that has just begun. You settle onto the edge of a sleeping platform near the fire, and the warmth of the hall settles around you, and the evening continues. The fire is the center of the room in every sense. It is the physical center. The hearth runs down the hall's long axis, and everything is arranged in relation to it. But it is also the temporal center, the thing that organizes the evening, that marks the distance between the daytime world of outdoor work and the nighttime world of the hall. During the day, the fire is tended, but not attended. Someone feeds it. Someone ensures it does not go out. But it is not the focus of activity. In the evening, when the people come inside and settle onto their platforms and take up their handwork, the fire becomes what everything faces. The conversations happen across it. The stories are told to it, or rather, to the people sitting on both sides of it. The fire between the teller and the listeners, equally available to both. The children doing their herb sorting are nearest to the fire on one side, the flames occasionally drawing their attention away from the task and toward themselves in the idle, receptive way that firelight draws the attention of children and adults alike, not because anything is happening in the fire, but because the fire is always almost about to do something, always in the small motions of combustion, always slightly different from one moment to the next, so that watching it feels like waiting for something that never quite arrives and is nevertheless satisfying to wait for. You look at the herbs in the children's clay bowl. You cannot identify all of them from where you sit. Some of the dried flowers and leaves of plants you recognize from the hillsides, angelica perhaps, and some variety of thyme or its relative, and something smaller and more delicate whose name you cannot supply, but whose smell reaches you faintly even across the hall. A green, slightly medicinal smell that is not unpleasant. These are the herbs that will go into the cooking through the winter months and into the remedies that the farmer's wife keeps and dispenses from her knowledge of what works and what is available. In a farmstead in Iceland in this period, the knowledge of plants and their uses belongs to the women of the household as surely as the management of the provisions does, and it is knowledge of real practical consequence, not magic, not superstition, but the accumulated and tested understanding of what the island's flora can provide. The farmer's wife glances at the bowl and says something brief to the girl, who nods and adjusts her approach to the stem she is working on. The correction is small and entirely functional. The girl makes it without comment. The evening arranges itself around the fire with the ease of something that has been arranged this way many times before. After a time, you rise from your place by the fire and move along the hall, further from the door and deeper into the household's interior life. The sleeping platforms on either side of the central hearth are differentiated in ways that are small but legible if you look carefully. The inner end of the hall, the end furthest from the door, the end where the bindi sits, is the place of the household's most significant members. The outer end, closer to the door and therefore closer to the cold that enters every time it opens, is the place of the servants and the least established members of the household. This arrangement is not written in any document and does not need to be. It is simply known, as all the significant arrangements of a household are simply known by the people who live within it. At the inner end of the hall, behind the farmer's raised platform, a wooden partition creates a small, slightly more private space. Not a separate room, nothing so distinct as that, but a screened-off area that gives the household's senior members a degree of separation from the communal space. In this area, a wooden chest of considerable size holds the household's most valued possessions. It is made of heavy planks and bound with iron, and it has a lock, a small, intricate mechanism of iron that the farmer's wife keeps the key to on the ring at her belt, a ring that also holds the key to the storehouse. The chest holds the family's silver coins and some cut silver by weight, the kind of measured, weighed wealth that this society uses for significant transactions, and it holds the best textile work, the carved items of horn and bone that have been in the family for generations, and the small collection of objects that have been brought from Norway and from trading voyages, and that represent the household's connection to the wider world beyond this valley. You notice, on the wall above the chest, a wooden shield. It is old, its painted surface worn to a ghostly trace of what it once showed a design in two colors that has faded to near invisibility, leaving only the suggestion of a pattern that might have been geometric or might have been animal. The shield is not in use. It has not been in use for many years. You think its edge is not maintained. Its grip is cracked. But it hangs on the wall because it is old, and because it belongs to the family, and because some things are kept not for their use, but for what they continue. Beside the shield, a pair of skis lean against the wall. They are simple things, 2 broad planks of wood, slightly curved at the front, with a single leather binding in the center of each one for the foot. They are well worn, the underside smoothed by many seasons of use, the bindings repaired in several places with newer leather. In this landscape, when the snow comes deeply, the skis are not recreation. They are how you move between farms when the drifts are too deep for walking. They are how you reach the outlying pastures to check on animals left in sheilings. They are winter transportation, serious and necessary. You move back along the hall, past the fire, toward the end near the door. Here, against the wall, are the larger tools and equipment of the farm's daily work. A pair of wooden rakes with iron-tipped tines, their handles smoothed by use, a hay fork of the same construction, a coil of rope made from horsehair, dense and surprisingly fine, considerably stronger than its thin strands suggest. Several wooden buckets with iron handles. The farm's outdoor work is finished, for the day has been finished in this late autumn twilight since before you arrived, and the tools are resting here in the orderly way of things that will be needed again tomorrow and the day after, for as long as the winter requires. Near the tools, a small alcove in the turf wall holds the farm's collection of lamps and lamp supplies. The lamps are shallow clay dishes with pinched lips for the wick, not very different from the lamps burning on the posts at the hearth's ends. Several are unlit, set in a row along the alcove shelf. Beside them, a clay pot of fish oil, the fuel, rendered from the livers of cod and haddock and other fish taken in the autumn fishing, and a bundle of dried plant material for wicks. The management of lamp fuel through the winter is a real economy. The lamps are not lit carelessly. They are lit where they are needed, for as long as they are needed, and the oil in the pot is known, its level watched. On the opposite wall, in the same area, hang the outer garments of the household, heavy wool cloaks, thick and close woven, their surfaces treated with lanolin to resist some degree of moisture, gloves of knitted wool and of sealskin, a pair of mittens in bright natural brown and cream wool, clearly the work of someone who knitted with more attention than usual. The 2 color pattern at the cuffs, careful and precise. The warmth that these garments provide is entirely necessary to any movement between the hall and the outdoors in winter, and they are treated, accordingly hung carefully, dried when wet, repaired when torn. The household's relationship with the cold, managed in part through the maintenance of these things. You stop near the door and look back along the length of the hall. The fire at the center gives it steady peat-heavy light and warmth. The 2 clay lamps at either end of the hearth add their small, unwavering circles of illumination. The people are still in their places, the farmer watching the fire, his wife working her tablet weaving, the young woman carding wool, the children now finished with the herbs and sitting in the particular, aimless way of children who have completed their assigned task and are waiting to see whether another one is coming. The servants have finished their work, and one of them, the woman, has settled onto her portion of the sleeping platform with a length of knitting in her hands, a stocking taking shape on a set of narrow bone needles. The man is already asleep, or nearly so, his mending set aside, his head back against the wall. The hall is entirely complete in itself. It holds everything the household needs to sustain itself through this night and through the many nights that will follow it. The warmth is here, and the fuel to maintain it. The food is stored, the animals are in the byre, the tools are at the wall. The people are present and occupied, or at rest. Outside, the wind moves over the turf roof, and the frost settles further into the valley grass, and the winter advances by its small daily increment. And inside, the fire burns, and the lamps burn, and the household does what it has always done, It endures the dark season by gathering itself together and keeping its warmth and waiting, with the patient knowledge that the light will come back because it always comes back, and that the farm will wake again in the spring because it has always woken again. You stand near the door end of the hall for a moment and simply look at it all from this angle, the length of the sky stretching before you, the fire at its center, the people arranged around it on their platforms, in the particular ease of people who have passed many evenings this way. This is what the hall is for. Not for sleeping, not exactly, though sleeping happens here. Not for eating, though eating happens here too. The hall is for this, for gathering the household into one warm space and keeping it there while the dark and the cold are outside, for the conversations and the work and the silence and the stories that make up the interior life of a farm through the months when there is no outdoor work to do, and the darkness is long, and the people must find their sustaining in one another, and in the warmth, and in the things they make, and the things they tell. The turf walls are thick enough that you cannot hear the wind from the middle of the hall. Only near the door and near the gable ends does the sound of it come through, a low and continuous pressure sound that is not unpleasant, that is simply the voice of the outside world reminding you it is there. The floor beneath your feet is cold at the edges, away from the fire's reach, and you feel that cold through the soles of your footwear and move slightly closer to the hearth. The fire gives its warmth in a rough circle around itself, and within that circle, the hall is genuinely warm enough to sit in light wool clothing without discomfort, warm enough that the children fell asleep without their furs pulled up. Outside that circle, the warmth diminishes toward the walls and toward the cold earth of the floor, and a person sleeping at the far ends of the sleeping platforms in the coldest depths of winter would want their furs pulled very close. The lamplight supplements the firelight in the way that a second small fire supplements a larger one, not dramatically changing the quality of light, but filling in some of the deeper shadows, giving the middle distance of the hall a degree more visibility. The lamps are set on flat stones at either end of the central hearth, their flames entirely steady in the nearly still air of the interior. Each one a precise and constant small point of warmth-colored light. They burn fish oil cod liver oil, specifically, rendered in the autumn from the catch that the men of this valley made at the sea cliffs and coastal fishing stations during the summer months. The smell of it, burning, is a fish oil smell, not unpleasant to people accustomed to it, distinctive, a smell that belongs specifically to the lamp-lit interiors of farms in the North Atlantic world, where the cold makes burning something a necessity, and fish oil is abundant, and wood is not. You notice, at the hearthside nearest the door, a wooden post that has been notched at intervals from about the height of a person's knee to about the height of their shoulder. The notches are regular, evenly spaced, 6 of them, and each notch holds a small wooden peg from which an object hangs: a pair of wool stockings, a leather knife sheath, a small cloth bag whose contents you cannot determine by looking. This is the household post, the place where small objects that need to be accessible and out of the way are kept, a practical solution to the perennial problem of where to put the things that don't yet have a designated place. The post has been used for a long time. The wood around the notches is smooth and dark with the handling of many years. You turn and take the small side door that leads through the partition into the byre. The smell hits you first, warm and dense and entirely animal. The smell of 4 cattle in their winter stalls, of the deep straw bedding that is added to weekly, of the hay piled against the far wall in loose, dry, sweet-smelling mounds that have been cut and dried and carted from the valley meadows through the summer and early autumn precisely for this purpose, to feed the cattle through the months when there is no grass for them. The byre is low, and the ceiling above the stalls is barely the height of a person. The roof timbers close overhead, the space dense with the warmth that the animals generate. It is warmer here than in the hall. The bodies of 4 large animals in a small space are a significant source of heat, and this warmth is not accidental. The placement of the byre against the hull is deliberate. The shared wall carrying the animal warmth into the living space, and reducing by that degree the amount of fuel the fire must supply. The cattle stand in their stalls in the particular stillness of large animals in winter housing, not the stunned stillness of creatures in distress, but the settled, inward stillness of animals that have made their accommodation with their situation and are simply present in it. They breathe slowly. One of them shifts a hind leg with a slow, unhurried motion and resettles. Another lifts its head slightly at your entrance, its broad, dark eye catching the light from the small lamp at the byre's entrance, and then lowers its head again without further interest. The hay in the nearest manger has been recently replenished. You can see the fresher, greener smelling hay on top of the older dry stuff, and the cattle nearest to it is eating with the slow, continuous grinding motion of a ruminant at work, the rhythm of it peaceful and entirely regular, without beginning or end. You stand in the byre for a few minutes and simply exist in its warmth and its smell and its sounds. The cattle breathing, the faint sound of hay being pulled from the manger, the wind, heard differently here than in the hall, more directly against the outer wall of the byre, which faces the northwest and takes the weather first, a lower and more present sound than the wind across the hall's roof. Then you go back through the side door into the hall. The farmer has shifted his position since you left. He is sitting forward now, his elbows on his knees, and he is talking. Not in the low, casual way of ordinary conversation, but in the shaped, deliberate way of a man telling a story, his voice a little slower than normal speech, a little more considered, the sentences given their full weight before the next one begins. The others have responded to this shift in the quality of his attention by giving him more of their own. The children have left their position at the hearthside and come closer, sitting on the floor at the farmer's feet. The woman with the tablet weaving has set the work in her lap without putting it down, the hands resting but ready. The young woman who was carding wool has set the paddles aside entirely and has drawn her legs up onto the platform, her chin resting on her knees. Even the woman doing her knitting has paused, the needles still, the stocking hanging from them. You return to your place at the edge of the platform and listen. He is telling of a man who lived in this valley, not this generation, not the last, but several generations back, in the time when the island was still being settled, when the best land was being claimed, and the disputes over that land were frequent and serious. The man's name is Gunnar Rolfsson, and he came from the west of Norway with his wife and 2 sons, and a household of servants and slaves thralls taken in raids on the Irish and Scottish coasts, who are not mentioned by name, but whose presence in the story is evident in the way all such things were evident in that earlier time, when the economy of this new island was built on a foundation that includes their uncounted labor. Gunnar Rolfsson took land in this valley. He built a hall perhaps on this same site, perhaps a little further up the slope. There is disagreement about this, and he grazed his cattle on the lower meadows and his sheep on the upper slopes, and he became, over the years, a man of some standing in the district. He went to the Ing, the great assembly of free men that meets each summer at the island's centre, at Ingvella, where the law is recited and disputes are settled and alliances are made, and the business of the entire island is conducted in the open air for 2 weeks every year. Gunnar Rolfsson was known there. He spoke at the Law Rock on at least 2 occasions on matters that concerned his district, and he was listened to. But then a dispute arose with his neighbour to the north, a man named Orkel Smonson, over the boundary between their grazing lands on the upper slopes. This is not an unusual kind of dispute. The boundaries in this landscape are often uncertain, marked by natural features that can be interpreted more than one way, by agreements made between men now dead and remembered differently by their sons. What was unusual in this case was the way the dispute was handled, because Orkel Smonson did not take the matter to the Ing as custom required. Instead, he sent 3 of his men to move the boundary markers one night, shifting them to a new position that gave him an additional portion of the upper slope. The farmer's voice slows here, not for drama. Drama is not his style, or the style of this kind of telling, but because the slowness is the appropriate pace for what is happening in the story, for the weight of the act being described. Moving boundary markers at night is not merely a property dispute. It is a moral violation, a statement about the kind of man Aurkel Smonsen is, a thing that carries consequences beyond the practical. Gunnar Rolfsson found the moved markers in the morning. He sent word to Aurkel Smonsen, asking for a meeting to discuss the matter and restore the previous boundary. Aurkel Smonsen did not come to the meeting. He sent his eldest son instead, with a message that the markers had always been where they now stood, that Gunnar Rolfsson's memory was in error, and that the matter was closed. Gunnar Rolfsson went to the inn. This is the point in the story where the farmer pauses, not for effect, but to add wood to the fire. He does it without standing, leaning forward and laying a single piece of dried driftwood along the edge of the coals without disturbing the existing arrangement, then sitting back. The fire brightens slightly with the addition, a small new flame finding the edge of the wood and travelling along it. The children watching do not look away from him. At the inn, Gunnar Rolfsson presented his case. He had witnesses, men who had seen the original placement of the markers, who could describe exactly where they had stood and for how long. Aurkel Smonsen had no such witnesses. The Goy who presided over the case, the local chieftain whose authority extended to managing such disputes for the district, heard both sides and deliberated with the men of the assembly. The outcome was a settlement. Aurkel Smonsen was required to restore the boundary markers to their original position and to pay Gunnar Rolfsson compensation in silver equal to a good milk cow in value as acknowledgement of the wrong done. Aurkel Smonsen paid the silver. He moved the markers back. He was not a man in good standing afterward, not because he was punished further, but because the story was told, as all such stories are told, at every farm in the district, through every winter that followed, until the name of Aurkel Smonsen became in that valley a shorthand for a particular kind of bad faith, a man who believed himself outside the law and discovered he was not. The farmer finishes the story without flourish. He simply stops, in the way that this kind of story stops, not at a moment of resolution, but at a point where the pattern of things has been fully revealed and nothing more needs to be said. He reaches for a wooden cup near his foot and drinks from it, whatever it contains, skyer thinned with water, or whey, or the mild fermented drink made from grain. The children are quiet for a moment, processing. Then the boy asks a question, whether Gunnar Rolfsson and Aurkel Smonsen ever spoke again, and the farmer says he does not know, that the story does not say, and the boy seems to find this acceptable, which suggests he understands something already about the way stories work in this world. They tell you what matters, and they do not tell you what doesn't. After a silence of perhaps a minute, the farmer's wife speaks. She does not tell a story, she makes an observation, in the quiet, factual tone that characterizes the commentary these people make on stories they have heard before. She says that Aurkel Smonsen's grandson was at the inn 3 summers ago, and that there are still people who remember the name. Still farmers in the north of the valley who use it in the way the old story established, not as an accusation, but as a category, a word for a particular kind of conduct. The farmer makes a sound of acknowledgement. He knows this. He may have told her this years ago, when he first heard it from his own father. These things move through families in this way, carried forward not by any formal effort, but by the simple fact that the past of a place lives in the mouths of the people who live in it, passed on in the evenings, through the winters, until it becomes the present's way of understanding itself, the saga tradition that will produce, in the coming generations, some of the most remarkable narrative literature of the medieval world, is not yet fully formed in the way historians will later describe it. But its roots are here, in evenings exactly like this one, in a farmer, on a platform beside his hearth, telling a story about a man who moved boundary markers and faced the consequences at the inn. The stories being told in halls like this one across Iceland in this period are the raw material from which the sagas will eventually be shaped not by any single author in any single act of composition, but by the accumulation of tellings, each one slightly shaped by the teller's memory and purpose and audience, each one tested against the memory of those who have heard it before and who will notice if something significant is changed. The law itself, the law recited each summer at Imvela by the Lekskumar, the law speaker, whose memory holds the entire body of Icelandic law, and who must recite a third of it each year so that it completes its full cycle every 3 years, is another version of the same practice. In a society without writing as a practical medium for legal or historical record, the memory of people is the archive. The stories are not entertainment that happens to preserve some history. The stories are the history. They are the record. They are the means by which a community maintains its understanding of what has happened and what it means. The farmer knows this without knowing it in those terms. He tells the story of Gunnar Rolfsson because he was told it, and because it is a useful story, and because a winter evening by the fire with a household around you is when you tell such things, and because the children at his feet are the next generation of the memory that holds this valley together. When the boy asks his question, did they ever speak again? He is already participating in that memory, testing its edges, understanding that some things are recorded and some things are not, beginning the long apprenticeship of knowing what his valley knows. The evening settles back into its quieter rhythms. The tablet weaving resumes. The carding paddles are taken up again. The woman's knitting needles begin their quiet clicking. Outside, the wind continues its steady pressure against the turf walls of the hall. The fire has been fed twice since the story ended, and the hall has grown quieter by degrees, the way it always grows quieter in the late hours of a winter evening, as the cold outside deepens and the fire's warmth becomes more emphatically the center of everything. The children are asleep. They were sent to their places on the platform near the inner end of the hall. Without much argument, they were tired enough for the argument not to be worth making, and they are sleeping under a shared fur, close together for warmth and for the simple animal comfort of proximity. Their breathing is audible in the quieter hall, slow and entirely regular. The breathing of children in the deep of their first sleep, untroubled and complete. The male servant has been asleep for some time, his mending set neatly aside, his arms folded across his chest, his mouth slightly open. The reliable and profound sleep of a man who has been working since before dawn, and whose body made the decision for him before his mind was consulted. The young woman who is carding wool has also set her work aside and drawn her blanket around her shoulders. She is not asleep, her eyes are open, and she is looking at the fire, but she is in that particular late evening state that is not quite awake and not quite asleep, where the thoughts move slowly and without urgency, and the fire is the whole world. The farmer and his wife remain awake, but barely. They have moved closer together on the inner platform, the farmer's back against the wall, his wife leaning slightly against him, with the unself-conscious ease of people who have spent decades in proximity. They are not speaking. They stopped speaking some time ago, with the ease of people who do not feel the need to fill silence with sound. The tablet weaving has been set aside, carefully wound and stored in the cloth bag that holds its materials. The fire burns at its lowest managed level, the level at which it will sustain itself through the rest of the night without attention, producing enough heat to keep the hall from becoming dangerously cold before morning, when someone will rise before full light and feed it back to its working strength. The fuel is mostly peat now, the driftwood consumed, and the peat gives its characteristic low, dense burn no flame to speak of, only the deep red-orange glow of the peat's surface consuming itself slowly and evenly. a glow that does not vary much, that is nearly constant, that gives the hall a dim, reddish illumination that is less like light and more like the memory of light. The 2 clay lamps have been extinguished. Their oil is too valuable to burn through the night when no one needs to see. Only the fire remains. You have been sitting on your platform through all of this, in the warmth, listening to the hall settle towards sleep. You have not been entirely still. You have looked at the things on the walls, the tools leaning near the door, the tablet weaving in its bag, the children's sleeping shapes, but your movement has been small and unhurried. The movement of someone with nowhere to go and nothing to do but be present in this place. While the evening becomes night, you rise now, quietly, and you move toward the door, and you take your outer garments from the peg where you left them, the heavy wool cloak and the gloves, and you put them on before you open the door, because you know what is outside, and you know what the difference will be. You lift the latch and push the door and step outside and pull the door shut behind you. The cold is immediate. It arrives on every exposed surface simultaneously, the way it always does, without announcement, simply as the condition of the outside world. Your breath appears before you in a cloud and disperses. The wind is still coming from the northwest, and it finds the gaps in your cloak at once, pressing through the wool with the thoroughness of cold air in darkness. But you stand where you are, and you look up, because something has changed. The clouds have thinned. Not entirely, the sky is not clear, not the full unveiled black of a cloudless winter night, but the cloud cover that was solid when you arrived has broken in the north and west, and through the breaks the stars are visible, sharp and cold and immediate, appearing in the gaps in the cloud like light seen through tears in a dark cloth. And in the northwest, where the cloud has pulled back most significantly, where there is a long, ragged opening in the overcast, the lights, not the faint, uncertain glow above the ridge that you saw when you arrived. The thing you could barely be certain was there. These lights are fully present, fully themselves, and they fill the opening in the clouds from horizon to well above the midpoint of the sky with a display of pale green-white that moves in its characteristic way, not like anything else moves, not like wind or water or fire, but in its own specific motion, a slow and sourceless shifting of brightness that builds and fades and rebuilds in different configurations, the curtains of light swaying as if on a wind that has nothing to do with the wind against your face. The valley around you, under these lights, has taken on a different quality from the valley you crossed in the last of the evening's grey brightness. The frost-browned grass, pressed down by the wind, has a faint luminosity to it, the Aurora's light reaching the ground and being taken up by the pale frost and held there, so that the valley floor gives off a soft glow of its own, barely perceptible, present if you look for it. The dark lines of the drainage channels catch no light at all, and are therefore visible as darkness against the slightly lighter darkness of the surrounding ground. The ridge to the north is a solid dark shape against the lit sky, its top edge defined by the aurora behind it, the lit sky making the ridge's silhouette clear. You stand outside the hall in the cold and the wind, and you look at the lights for a long time. You think of the people inside the farmer, with his back against the wall and his wife against him, the children in their shared fur, the young woman watching the fire, the sleeping servant with his arms folded. None of them know, right now, that the lights are outside, or perhaps they do know, in the way that people who live in a place for their whole lives know what the weather is doing, even when they cannot see it, a feeling in the air, a particular quality to the night that tells them something is happening in the sky above the valley. Tomorrow, if asked, the farmer will look at the sky and say whether the lights were strong last night. He will know, or he will not, in the way of a man whose relationship with this sky and this weather is lifelong and complete. He will not be awed by the lights. He will note them the way he notes the wind direction and the frost depth and the behavior of the cattle as information about the world he lives in, important, attended to, incorporated into the ongoing knowledge of this place. But you are a visitor here, and the lights above the valley are extraordinary to you, and you allow yourself to receive them as extraordinary. Standing in the cold with the wind pressing at your back, and the frost-grey grass around you, and the turf hall behind you with its seam of smoke from the roof hole, its quiet, and its fire, and its sleeping people. The lights shift. A new curtain forms in the west and rises, brighter than the others, a deeper green at its center, and you watch it rise and brighten, and then slowly, over several minutes, fade again, and another forms further east, lower in the sky, and moves. The cold is thorough on your face and in your lungs. Your breath rises and disperses. The wind moves over the turf roof and through the valley grass. The lights continue, slowly, in the gaps between the clouds. You turn and look at the hall, the dark, low shape of it against the slope. The line of smoke from the roof hole bending immediately in the wind. The door with its iron hinges and its low frame, and its twisted rope of grass hanging beside it. Behind that door, the warmth, the fire, the sleeping people, the smells of peat and animal and wool, and the remains of the evening meal. The farmer, his wife, the children, everything that a household is. You turn back to the lights. They move above the valley with their particular patience, their particular silence, in no hurry, belonging entirely to themselves, indifferent in the most complete and neutral sense, not cold toward the people below them, not warm toward them, simply occurring in the sky as they occur every winter and have always occurred. The lights of the north doing what they do above whatever land is beneath them, above this valley and these farms and these lives. You stand between the hall and the lights for a long time. The wind is steady. The cold is steady. The lights are steady in their shifting way, constant in their motion, moving without arriving anywhere, which is itself a kind of constancy. After a while, it is difficult to say how long. The lights are not a thing you count time against. You turn toward the door. You lift the latch. You push the door open, ducking your head. You enter. The warmth is there, as it was, as it will be for as long as the fuel lasts and someone tends the fire. The peat coals glow in the long hearth. The hall is dim and quiet. The farmer's breathing has deepened. His wife is asleep against him, her head on his shoulder. The children do not stir. The servant woman has sat down her knitting and folded it carefully in her lap, and her eyes are closed. You take off your outer garments and hang them back at the peg. You return to your place on the platform. The warmth reaches you from the coals, not a sharp warmth, not a warming from cold warmth, but a steady, even, ambient warmth that is simply the temperature of the inside of this hall on a winter night, maintained against the cold outside by the fire and the walls and the accumulated warmth of the people sleeping in it. You hear the breathing of the hall, the farmer, his wife, the children, the servant, 6 separate rhythms, each different, each slow, each entirely settled into the deep of their sleep. And beneath the breathing, the peat coals making their faint internal sound, not crackling as wood cracks, but a low, intermittent, very quiet settling. The sound of material consuming itself with great patience and very little drama. And beneath that, if you are still enough, and the wind outside is briefly quieter, the breathing of the cattle in the byre. Through the wall, through the partition, the slow and collective exhalation of 4 large animals in their winter stalls, warm in their own warmth, eating their hay, waiting in the way of animals for whatever comes next. Outside, the lights continue. You know this without seeing them. They are there above the valley, above the hall, above the frost-browned grass and the dark drainage channels, and the ridge to the north that stands black against the lit sky. They are moving above it all in their slow and patient way, making their light, shifting and brightening and fading, as they have always done above this island in winter, and will always do, indifferent and extraordinary and entirely themselves. You rest now in the warmth of the hall, with the peat fire glowing at the center, with the sleeping people around you, with the cattle breathing through the wall, and the lights moving above the roof in the cold outside. You hear the breathing, you hear the fire, you hear the wind, very faintly, at the seams of the turf wall, pressing and releasing, the steady and patient pressure of the outside world against the boundary that the hall creates between itself and the cold. The hall holds, the fire holds. The night continues in its slow passage toward the dawn, which will come pale and low and brief. As winter dawns in Iceland, come a brightening of the horizon to the south, a grey and gentle light that gives the valley back its shapes before retreating again into the long afternoon dark. But that is hours away. For now there is only the night and the warmth and the sleeping hall and the lights above it. You rest here now, in this warm and particular darkness, in this hall that has been warm through many winters and will be warm through many more, in this valley, at the edge of the world, where the lights come in autumn and the grass comes in spring, and the people endure both with the particular steadiness of a people who have been doing exactly this for a very long time. You rest. The breathing of the hall surrounds you. The coals glow, very gently, in the long hearth. You rest.